The store went quiet the moment the manager's hand came up. Brittany Anderson's slap cracked through the boutique like a gunshot. The sound briefly swallowed the murmurs of shoppers, the clink of jewelry, the soft hum of air conditioning. Diana Williams' cheek flushed where the blow landed. She placed her palm to her face, an almost automatic, gentle motion. Not the gasp of someone undone, but the measured touch of someone cataloging an injury as data rather than drama. Then she smiled. It wasn't the small, wounded smile of someone beaten into submission. It was a controlled, knowing smile that unsettled more than it soothed. There was something in it that told the crowd, without words, that they had misread the moment. "Security! Escort this woman out!" Brittany barked, eyes blazing with righteous fury. Her voice wavered between command and performance. All of the store's attention turned toward them. Diana did not argue. She did not shout. She did not reach for legal counsel on instinct or attempt a dramatic reveal. She simply stood, polished and composed, while the room leaned into the spectacle Brittany had crafted. Phones were already lifting, lenses trained to capture the humiliation. Some faces watched with gleeful curiosity. Others watched with the faint embarrassment of people who sensed their complicity, but had not yet named it. 8 hours earlier, the same woman had walked through the door and blended in as if she were no one at all. She had worn the everyday armor she favored, faded jeans, a thrift store sweater, sneakers that had been resurrected more than once. Diana Williams dressed down by choice, an old habit that kept her tethered to where she had come from. It was a deliberate, private lesson. Never forget the scenes that taught you empathy. Diana was 52, precise in her steadiness, and quietly immense in influence. She owned 847 stores across the country. She had built a retail empire from scratch. She was, to the outside world, a self-made billionaire. Inside her, she kept a ledger of the humiliations her family had endured. Her mother laughed out of a fitting room. Her father ignored in a diner. And an oath to use power to change the scenes that hurt people. Today, that oath would be put to use in the most direct way possible. Brittany Anderson, 42, had grown up on the same social axis where people prove themselves by display. She had worked her way from sales associate to store manager and had taken the lesson too far. Authority became a way to insist on belonging, and belonging required others to be excluded. Her management style had been a mixture of theater and intimidation. Stage the moment, cue the crowd, control the narrative. She cultivated fans who craved the validation of being on the inside. Maria Gonzalez worked the register. She was 28, a single mother whose salary kept her son's life intact. Tyler Brooks had been with the store for 8 years. He admired Brittany for her decisiveness. Amber Davis, 24, idolized Brittany, eager for approval. Helen Carter shopped there and injected social validation into every moment. She was a regular with deep pockets and no qualms about speaking her mind. Carlos Rivera, the security guard, complied without question. Together they formed Brittany's supporting cast, and they had learned, willingly or not, to perform cruelty in the name of protection, protecting the brand, protecting the right clients. Diana had come in that morning because she had received anonymous complaints, whispered accusations that a store culture tolerated exclusion and humiliation. As an owner, she could have sent a memorandum or demanded a written report. Instead, she wanted to see how people acted when they believed authority protected them. So she went in as an ordinary customer. For the first hour, she moved quietly through displays, making mental notes of how staff approached patrons, how mannequins were dressed, how customers were treated. She observed the small things, a glance dismissed, a smile withheld, because petty cruelty in small doses accumulates into policy. She asked soft, casual questions and made notes of body language and tone. She watched Brittany's movement through the store like someone learning choreography from afar. Then Brittany saw her. The sight of Diana's unremarkable clothes set something in Brittany's brain into motion. Her worldview translated clothing into class and class into permission to judge. She crossed the floor with theatrical cheer and condescension folded into a smile. "Oh, honey, are you lost? "The goodwill is that way," Brittany said, patronizing and loud enough that people nearby overheard. Diana met the mockery with poise. "No, I'm exactly where I need to be," she replied, with a calm that didn't beg for pity but demanded evaluation. Where a strong manager might have de-escalated, Brittany escalated. Her voice became performance. "Sweetie, this isn't a yard sale," she scoffed. "These aren't prices for everyone," Helen tittered. The crowd's attention thickened. Brittany was not only humiliating a stranger in public, she was gifting a spectacle. She added lines, sharper than needed, for effect. "That bracelet costs more than 6 months' rent. Maybe try the costume jewelry at Target," she crowed, and people chuckled. Some customers edged closer to watch the scene, as if to witness a morality play, the wealthy defender of standards shooing off intruders. Tyler, Maria, Amber, and Carlos fell into expected positions. Tyler standing protectively, Maria hands trembling with the fear of losing her job if she disagreed, Amber with a nervous little laugh, Carlos ready to physically remove Diana if ordered. At first, Diana looked like an ordinary target for bullying. She looked small in their narrative. She asked, with the same small voice that hid the fact it was not always given to her, to try on a dress from the VIP section, a $4,000 designer piece. Brittany poured on the theatrics, announcing it to the store as if revealing an absurdity. "Attention, everyone! She wants to try on our $4,000 dress." She suggested a credit check. Phones lifted. Recording began. Humiliation mutated into accusation when Brittany demanded to see Diana's purse. "When someone clearly doesn't belong, we check for sticky fingers," she said, with an implication thinly disguised as policy. She rifled through a taped-up wallet and held it up like proof of thrift, an indictment. The crowd roared with laughter and offered more degrading suggestions. Goodwill, Salvation Army, discount chains. An older man in a suit suggested yard sales. Another joked that Diana probably ate coupons. Each suggested slight fed the group's sense of superiority. People who would otherwise call cruelty wrong found pleasure in a ritual of exclusion when the collective egged them on. Unseen by the mockers, Diana had been recording from the beginning. Her phone captured everything, every dismissive sneer, each guffaw, the slow turn of a manager who believed her identity mattered more than humanity. It recorded faces and phrases and the exact tone of a community that rationalized cruelty as protection. Brittany raised her hands theatrically and delivered a final line designed to seal the humiliation. "We serve people who shop for pleasure, not necessity. This place isn't for pretending." The crowd applauded. She took a showman's bow. Then she struck. The slap was out of cadence with the applause. It landed with the sickening cadence of something nobody should have let happen. People gaped. Some were frozen. Others, primed by narrative, cheered until the shock replaced applause with a stunned hush. Diana didn't scream. She didn't collapse. She clutched at her cheek, the slow press of a hand that cataloged the blow and filed it for later. On her face, that studied smile returned, not of triumph but of recognition. She walked to the exit. Outside in the parking lot, she made 2 calls, one to her assistant, James, and one to herself as witness. Her voice was calm, deliberate. "James, bring the ownership documents and the security footage. Bring legal, PR, and security. This is store 47. We're documenting everything." Inside, Brittany shouted through the glass to shame her more. "Don't come back. Tell your friends this isn't the place for people like you." The crowd cheered. They felt justified. They felt righteous. They were about to be undone by a quiet corporate machine. 15 minutes later, 3 black SUVs eased into the lot. They were not ostentatious. They were businesslike, the kind of vehicles a corporation uses when it needs to manage damage and secure facts. A small, efficient team emerged. Rachel Stone, Director of Human Resources. Michael Torres, Head of Legal. Sarah Chen, the COO. David Kim, the Security Director. And a clutch of lawyers and corporate investigators. They streamlined toward the glass storefront with the focus of people, who did not come for pleasantries. Brittany saw them and assumed applause. Would follow that these were VIPs who heard about her professional handling and had come to congratulate. She moved forward with the same practiced grin. Rachel's greeting was clipped and formal. Miss Anderson, we need to discuss your handling of a customer today. The crowd, suiting up to continue the performance, turned to cheer. Helen beamed. Amber preened like a student at a recital. Tyler straightened. Maria's hands trembled with the internal logic of self-preservation. Brittany swelled with pride. I followed protocol. I protected the store. I made everyone comfortable. She gestured to the champagne, to the glasses raised like a marriage ritual to exclusion. Rachel nodded slowly, her expression neutral. Then let us introduce you to the guest who brought our corporate team. She turned to the entryway. When Diana stepped in with the corporate group trailing behind her, the store's energy collapsed into silence. The cameras that had been raised to capture the humiliation now lowered. Faces that months earlier would have justified themselves suddenly registered the imprint of recognition and fear. This is Diana Williams, Rachel said, with an economy of words that landed like a verdict. Founder, CEO, and owner of Prestige Collections. The effect was immediate. Sound left the room. Helen Carter's hand flew to her mouth. Maria's eyes filled, and she made a small, desperate sound that might have been apology, might have been plea. Amber shrank into herself. Tyler looked sick. Brittany's bravado crumpled like paper. For a moment she tried to recover the narrative, to frame the story as one of duty. I was protecting our image, she began. But the syntax of her defense had no weight when the person she'd tried to reduce to a caricature stood before everyone, composed and in control. Diana's voice cut through the remnants of that attempted defense with the calmness of someone who had been planning this scene. You treated me as though I were less than human. You deemed me less than because of what I wore. That was your choice. There was no shrillness in her tone, but every word found its mark. Rachel's team, instructed and trained to observe, had already begun collecting proof. The legal team recorded statements. The security director would later compile video from the store's cameras to cross-reference with the phones that had been held aloft by those who had cheered. Effective immediately, Rachel said, once she had taken in the scene and read the notes she'd been handed. Miss Anderson's employment with Prestige Collections is terminated. She is banned from all company locations. That pronouncement, delivered with the clinical efficiency of HR protocols, unthreaded the fabric of the store's earlier consensus. Brittany staggered, a strip of plastic badge captured from her lapel, then escorted from the premises as if she were the intruder she had theatrically expelled. The customers who had laughed and pointed now fumbled for plausible deniability. I didn't know. She seemed suspicious. We were only... The statements dissolved under the weight of video and the gravity of their participation. Diana's hour of public reckoning did not end with Brittany's removal. She addressed the entire room. Her voice was regulated, the cadence of someone used to addressing shareholders and large rooms, yet open enough to be heard by staff and customers alike. For hours, she said, you cheered as a manager cut another human being to pieces. You applauded division. You made entertainment out of humiliation. You judged me, then celebrated the judgment. Faces flushed. Helen stepped back as if burned. Maria sobbed and clutched at Diana's knee, an act of desperation and remorse that held the rawness of someone terrified for a paycheck. Diana did not flinch. She looked at Maria, not with the implacable stare of punishment, but with the weary appraisal of someone who had spent half a lifetime determining how to balance consequence with compassion. Decisions have consequences, Diana announced, and immediately her orders began to move. Under her direction and the work of corporate, several people faced immediate removal or discipline. Maria Gonzalez and Amber Davis were terminated for participating in the discriminatory behavior. Tyler Brooks would be demoted and required to complete comprehensive bias training. Helen Carter would be banned from the chain for life. Customers who had engaged in the collective harassment were blacklisted and their accounts flagged. The security director gathered footage and compiled a report. HR prepared formal termination letters and was ready to distribute them. How can you do that? Maria asked between sobs. I needed this job. I followed orders. Her voice collapsed under the weight of her own logic. Diana looked at her with a briefness of sorrow and practicality. You had choices, Maria, Diana replied. I understand fear. But fear is not a free pass to hurt someone else. If you want to work in a place that values respect, we will support that, but not at the price of human dignity. The change was decisive and public. Diana announced a sweeping overhaul of store culture, mandatory bias and inclusion training for every employee, zero-tolerance discipline for managers who use their authority to demean customers. A new policy designed to protect customers from bullying, whether by staff or by other patrons. And a leadership review across stores to ensure future managers were selected based on demonstrated empathy and competence, rather than their ability to command a room. But the most consequential part of the day was not the firings or the policy memos. It was the lesson that spread beyond the glass of that boutique. The shame that arrived at the heels of applause left echoing questions among those who had cheered. How quickly did they shift from bystanders to participants? How does a crowd forget to look at the humanity in front of them? For many, that day's viral video would become a mirror. Outside, the piles of little vignettes began to build. A woman who had laughed to cover her discomfort. A man who had applauded to feel aligned with a group. A cashier who wanted to be liked by her manager more than she valued a stranger's dignity. Each story fed the larger, darker truth. That cruelty expands to fit the room it's given. There were practical outcomes that followed in the next days. The store's media channels published official statements. Board calls discussed reputational risk and the speed of response. Customers demanded clarity and promises, and Diana's team produced them. Third-party audits, independent training vendors, and new hiring practices. The company moved to create a review board that would hear complaints from both employees and customers and adjudicate them transparently. But those structural changes, necessary as they were, could not immediately repair the harm done to one human being in front of dozens. Some community members demanded a public apology from the individuals involved and reparations for moral injury. Diana declined to litigate the emotional terrain publicly. She chose outcomes that she said would produce durable change rather than spectacle. Long-term education budgets, community outreach, and partnerships with organizations that worked to help people who had suffered discrimination. In private, she sat with the people who had been directly affected. With Maria, she negotiated a severance that would tide a household for months while Maria pursued retraining. Amber received a referral for counseling and a structured path to re-employment contingent upon completing empathy and service ethics training. Tyler was invited to a coaching program that would test his motivations for leadership, whether his authority came from empathy or from command and control. Brittany's story went beyond termination. For her, the fall was swift and public. Within a day, quitclaim notices moved through corporate channels, and an internal memo circulated. Zero tolerance for managers who weaponize embarrassment. She found herself the target of an internet that was quick to condense narrative into hashtag. Some tried to defend her. She was protecting the brand. Others scoured public profiles to build a dossier of past behaviors. The arc of a person who had taken a certain lessons in authority and turned them merciless. But Diana's intent was never to destroy an individual for vengeance. Her goal had been to create a corrective, to ensure the culture she had built in hundreds of stores did not turn into permission for cruelty. The corrective had an educative arc, meant to remind every manager that leadership without humanity is a hollow thing. Months later, the store at 5th Street looked different. New managers were in place, chosen not for bravado but for character references and interviews that tested responses to ethical quandaries. Training modules rolled out and attendance was tracked and reported to regional directors. Customer service scripts changed, and a new signage campaign emphasized dignity and respect. Public apologies were issued where appropriate. The viral video that had burned through feeds became a case study for business schools and human resources workshops. A cautionary tale of how cruelty finds an audience and how an owner can, if she chooses, flip the script. Diana continued to wear her old sneaker ritual. She found the choice to be useful in meetings as a personal anchor to humility. She also learned, increasingly, the mechanics of how to make institutional change happen, policy that carries teeth, accountability that is transparent, and the hard work of changing a culture one manager at a time. At a board meeting a few months on, A young director asked what she wanted the company's public identity to be. "We will sell beautiful things," Diana replied, "but we will insist those things be sold with dignity. We started a retail business that makes people want to admire what they wear. It does not exist to humiliate those who do not. That is the ethic." Her voice, measured and instructive, had a ripple effect across the brand. The measures she instituted took time to show results. Some people left the company, bitter or shamed. Others stayed and learned. New customer groups attracted positive attention for the firm. People who had avoided the stores for fear of being judged returned to see if the promises were real. Trust, once cracked, rebuilt slowly. The day of the slap remained a pivot point. For those who had watched and cheered, the memory haunted them. For those who had been shamed, it was a wound that the company could try to heal but not erase. Diana's decision to record, to bring the corporate team, and to make a public corrective was not simply punitive. It was an attempt to reclaim a norm, that no one belongs to the state of being belittled in public without recourse. In the end, the message that rippled beyond Store 47 came not as triumphalism from wealth, but as the quiet insistence that dignity is not a commodity sold at a boutique price. It is a human baseline. Respect costs nothing, but the absence of it can cost communities their trust, employees their self-worth, and companies their reputation. On quiet evenings, Diana would sometimes walk past the glass-fronted store. Inside, mannequins displayed new lines, and customers moved without the hush of a crowd eager for spectacle. She would watch people try on dresses, choose handbags, and walk out. Sometimes she saw a moment of kindness, a clerk helping a nervous first-time buyer with patience, a customer complimenting another's choice. Those moments, small and ordinary, were the everyday proof that the right course had been set. She always smiled then, but it was never the same smile she had worn in the parking lot. It was the one that said a difficult conversation had begun, and that, in her reckoning, had been worth the cost.